Good.
We wanted to look at the big five personality traits and peer pressure.
My name is Samantha Busick.
I'm Jade O'Connor.
And I'm Olivia Eastloss.
So for some background on peer pressure and the big five traits, Bogg and Roberts in 2004 found that individuals who are high in conscientiousness are less likely to partake in risky behaviors. And because of this, they may be less likely to give in to peer pressure due to the risks and regulations of COVID-19. Going along with that previous research, Tucker, Elliott, and Klein found that individuals with higher conscientiousness tend to feel a social responsibility to partake in healthy behaviors. And this could also affect the way an individual acts with the COVID-19 virus. Another study by Bryn, Selassie, Mansott, and Worthy in 2017 looked at the big five traits and social pressure. They found that individuals with high neuroticism were seen to perform worse under social pressure, but they also found that agreeableness was inconclusive. The study also found that both agreeableness and extroversion had no association with decision-making under pressure.
So the question we wanted to research was which of the big five personality traits can predict peer pressure susceptibility during COVID-19? And we hypothesized that high conscientious levels would result in less susceptibility to peer pressure. And as for the other four big five traits, which are agreeableness, extroversion, openness, and neuroticism, we hypothesized no significant relationship between those and peer pressure susceptibility.
So for our method, we utilized a correlational study, and we had 78 total participants. Our participants took an online survey that included questions from the Big Five Inventory Too Short and a susceptibility to peer pressure scale. The questions from the BFI Too Short were about the Big Five traits, and they were on a scale from 1 to 5. An example of one of these items is, I am someone who tends to be quiet. 1, strongly disagree, or 5, strongly agree. So for the susceptibility to peer pressure scale, we modified these questions to pertain to COVID-19 behaviors. And an example of one of these items is, although I don't want to, I would take my mask off in a large group of people and attempt to fit in. And this was also on a Likert scale 1 to 5. We also included an attention check, which required participants to leave a question blank and demographic questions. Participants were awarded extra credit for completing a survey.
For our analyses, we ran Pearson R correlations for each of the big five traits and their associations with susceptibility to peer pressure. For conscientiousness, we found a non-significant negative correlation. Our R value was negative 0.188, and our P value was more than 0.01, which means it was non-significant. Our average scores for conscientiousness was 3.59 and a standard deviation of 7.724, and the graph of those scores are shown to the right.
As for agreeableness, this was the one trait out of the big five in which there was a significant relationship, and that correlation was negative. And the Pearson's R was negative 0.243, which shows that while there was a significant relationship, this does not mean there was a strong one. And our p-value was 0.032, and since it was less than 0.05, this will confirm that significant correlation. And our mean was 3.92, and the standard deviation was 0.678. And our results for this trait can be shown on the graph to the right.
So our original hypothesis was not supported. Agreeableness was the only trait out of the big five that had a significant relationship. We believe that these findings might have occurred because individuals who are more agreeable tend to comply with rules and laws and authority figures. Conscientiousness may not have been significant because some of our previous research only utilized situations such as drinking and smoking and other college peer pressure behaviors, whereas our situation was COVID-19.
Some limitations we saw with our research was that the majority of peer pressure questions were about peer pressure in general, not all specifically COVID-19. So that might have gotten in the way of our answers. We also modified those COVID-19 peer pressure questions based on what we believed would be proper scenarios that would probably happen in college while being still in the COVID-19 pandemic. But we think that there may be other important scenarios that we may not have included. We also have thought about that people may not have answered COVID-19 questions truthfully, because that would mean they're admitting to breaking the rules and regulations put in place by state laws and school laws.
So some of the future directions we have in our research, we can use questions that are more subtle in identifying COVID-19 peer pressure behaviors. The questions that we may have put were not, or were very direct and would, as Jade said, would cause people to admit that, that they were maybe breaking COVID-19 guidelines. And we can also use real life scenarios, or an observational study would especially be beneficial to observe peer pressure susceptibility. An observational study would help us see how people will truly behave in these certain social situations rather than being in the setting of a study or an experiment. And we can investigate or further investigate the negative relationship between peer pressure and agreeableness. Any questions?